string of lethal carjackings terrorized the Washington, D.C. area. Ballistics reveal that it's the work of a serial killer who tries to run over one victim with his own car. The FBI and police set a clever trap, but the killer insists on a violent shootout.
In the early 90s, a serial killer stalked lone victims in the dead of night. His hunting ground, the suburbs of Washington, D.C. His target, anyone who owned a car. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The gunman was as elusive as he was deadly. He struck quickly and without mercy. Now the FBI must follow the twisted path of a killer wherever it leads.
November 13th, 1991. Silver Spring, Maryland, a suburb north of Washington, D.C. Montgomery County Police respond to a report of shots fired at a car dealership. Officers discover the body of a woman shot in the chest and forehead.
Call the medical examiner.
And another gunshot victim nearby.
It's got a pulse.
The man is breathing but unconscious. Paramedics rush him to the hospital. Montgomery County Homicide Detective Ed Day coordinates his department's swift response to the slaying.
You saturate the case as fast as you can, work on it as fast as you can, get as much information as fast as you can, and try to resolve it as fast as you can. Unfortunately, the homicides, time is terrible. The more time goes by, the less your odds are that you're going to have a satisfactory conclusion to the investigation.
Investigators learn the two victims are janitors. They were cleaning the building that night and would have come outside around 10 p.m. to dump the garbage. The detectives work to determine a motive for the attack.
You don't overlook the obvious. You have a shooting like this at a car lot. Is that a possible motive for the killing, the theft of a car? Of course, had representatives from the auto dealer come out, do an inventory. There was no vehicles missing. There was no property missing from the inside of the establishment.
Investigators locate the victim's car keys nearby and determine neither of their personal vehicles are missing. Robbery does not seem to be the motive.
Nothing was taken. They had money on them. There wasn't a single thing missing.
Are you Mr. Escobar's attendant physician?
Yes, I am.
Can you tell me about him?
With almost no evidence to go on, Detective Day hopes to learn more from the critically wounded man.
As you can see, he's intubated. He's also in a coma, and he's just not responding.
We do that with any kind of a shooting that's potentially fatal. There's a rule in law that a dying declaration does not have to be corroborated. It's not hearsay because if the person knows he's going to die, he's assumed to be able to be telling the truth. So if you can get a statement from somebody in really serious circumstances, then it's always a very, very powerful piece of evidence.
I got to check on you.
But the victim dies 9 days later without ever regaining consciousness. During the autopsy, the medical examiner recovers the only piece of physical evidence, the bullets that killed the victims. At the Maryland State Police Crime Lab, ballistics expert Joe Capera examines the evidence to determine if there was more than one shooter.
there was a microscopic comparison done to determine if these bullets were fired from the same gun. And indeed, as a conclusion to these examinations, I concluded that these bullets were fired from the same gun.
Examining the scratch patterns on the bullets, Capera determines the make and model of the murder weapon.
I was able to ascertain, first of all, the caliber of the gun, which was a .357, and then through the measurements of the unique land and groove areas, I was able to ascertain that it was a Ruger .357.
With no obvious motive for the slayings, detectives explore the victims' personal lives for clues.
If you work inside out, you try to find out if these people had any enemies, if there was any triangle, you know, a thwarted lover or something like that. These things take you in 100 different directions, and you just have to take care of one thing at a time. You eliminate something and you move on to the next issue, and you just go from there.
Detectives find nothing in the victims' backgrounds that could have led to their murders. Since investigators found the victims' car keys near the bodies, they decide to re-examine the slayings as a failed car theft. With that possible motive in mind, detectives speculate how the crime might have occurred.
They were cleaning. The business was closed for the night. They were taking the trash out.
Hey! Nice and easy, just throw me your
Detectives suspect the gunman demanded the victim's car keys.
keys.
Here, just right here. Don't hurt me.
Based on the position of the woman's body relative to her keys, they believe she tried to run.
And you have to make the assumption that he lost control of the situation and decided to kill the two of them before he identified what car belonged to them. He escalated an attempt theft into a murder for no good reason.
With little evidence to go on, the case grows cold. Then, 3 months later, investigators respond to the scene of another homicide. They find the body of psychology professor Dr. Shaheen Hastrudi lying in a parking lot in Bethesda, Maryland. Unable to locate her car, detectives believe she was the victim of a fatal carjacking. Noting the lack of blood spatter evidence near the body, they suspect Hastrudi's assailant shot her while she was still inside her car. Through interviews with her colleagues, authorities determined Dr. Hastrudi left her office around 8 p.m.
She's obviously accosted. At some point gets in her car.
Get in the car! Start the car. Start the car. Don't touch it!
Once she's already in the car, she's shot. She's taken out of the car, dumped on the lot, and the suspect steals her car. Gunshot wound to the head, large caliber, no witnesses.
The only solid evidence is a pair of bullets recovered from the victim's body. Investigators send the bullets to the Maryland State Police Crime Lab to compare them with the bullets from the double homicide. It is a match. The two crimes are connected.
So we got a couple of crimes here.
Homicide detectives begin examining unsolved cases involving similar circumstances.
Caliber in the head. Easy.
One detective recalls a recent homicide, which occurred a month before Hastruti was killed.
Very similar to these crimes.
That victim was also shot in the head with a large caliber gun. As in the Silver Spring double homicide, responding officers found the victim's keys near his body. But this victim didn't own a car, which leads investigators to question whether car theft was the motive, or if the case is even connected to the other shootings.
But we said, you know, this is looking like they're definitely linked for some reason.
Let's see if we can get some ballistics on it. Let's get some ballistics on it.
So authorities locate the bullet from that case and send it to be tested. Ballistics expert Joe Capera compares the bullets from the 4 homicides.
I did a cross-comparison examination to the previous bullets. And as a result of that examination, I found that all the bullets were fired from the same weapon.
So we're starting to see a pattern here, guys. We got 4
Investigators have connected the 4 homicides through the ballistic evidence and an apparent car theft motive, but they cannot understand why the killer chose to murder his victims.
None of these people were armed. Stature-wise, none of these people I thought were particularly a threat to the suspect. 2 possibilities: that he had lost control of them and felt the best way to regain control of the situation was to kill him, or there was some psychological reason that he didn't like these particular people.
Detectives believe they are dealing with an extremely violent and unpredictable criminal and suspect he may still be in the area.
Montgomery County was his basis of operation. That's where he felt most comfortable. That's where he did all his murders. That's where he did his, you know, his most risky business. That's where he laid in wait for people. So it was obvious he had some strong tie to Montgomery County.
Investigators suspect he will strike again and hope to stop him before he does. But they have no clues that can help identify him.
These are looking fantastic.
And the killer's weapon is the only thing that can connect him to the murders.
The best evidence we got is the bullets. And if we can get him and get the gun, then we definitely have a very, very strong case.
Now this one came out of...
Authorities don't want to give the killer a reason to destroy his gun, and with it their only evidence.
He's gonna make another mistake. We're gonna move on.
So they decide to keep the ballistics match away from the media.
It's all good. It's all good. This guy...
If we supply the information to the press that all the bullets came from the same gun, be a good likelihood that he would either dispose of the weapon, or he would, in worst case scenario, obtain a different weapon and keep committing the crime.
More than a week after the Hastruti killing, a man wearing a stocking mask and latex gloves robs a bank in Chantilly, Virginia. The bank's video security system captures his image. A witness tells the FBI that the bank robber fled in a late model white vehicle and gives them the license plate number. The description of the getaway car matches the vehicle stolen from Hastruti, attracting the attention of Montgomery County detectives. But the license plate is not Hastruti's. Investigators trace the plate and discover it had been stolen from a vehicle in Annandale, Virginia.
I've seen them around together and stuff, and it really looked like that.
For detectives, this leaves open the possibility that Hastruti's car was used in the bank robbery. The Montgomery County Task Force, which now includes agents from the FBI, requests copies of the bank's surveillance tapes to learn what they can about the robber. Investigators watch the crime unfold and notice the robber is carrying a revolver of the same make and caliber used in the 4 homicides. They think he could be the killer. The footage is the best lead they have in identifying a suspect, according to FBI Special Agent Robert Coffey.
We had a great piece of video that actually showed the individual, the handgun. That picture was actually put on the news locally and regionally to try to see if we could spark some interest as far as someone identifying him.
Investigators also release information that their suspect, the money he stole, and the vehicle he was driving may be covered in red dye.
If you do anything, a phone call, anything, I'm going to shoot somebody.
The teller managed to slip dye packs into the bag of money. And a dye pack is a device that once it goes through the door of the bank, it's electronically activated. There's a timer on it that gives a person a little bit of time to get away from the bank, and then it explodes, spewing this terrible red dye. It stains. It's very difficult to get off. It gets on the money, and it will not come off the money. It takes a while to get it off you personally.
5 days after the bank robbery, police in Northern Virginia find an abandoned car bearing the stolen plates reported by the witness. A check of the vehicle identification number proves that it is a Strudy's car. The officer peers inside, examining the interior.
We had the red dye stains in it from the dye packs from the bank. We had proof positive that it had been used in the bank robbery.
Officers impound the vehicle and transport it to the police garage for processing. Technicians find bloodstains inside the car and collect samples as evidence. But they do not find anything that can identify the killer. Lab examiners extract DNA from the blood evidence and compare it to Strudy's. It is a match. Finally, investigators are able to look at the various crimes and understand their suspect's overall plan.
It's gelled into something that makes a little bit of sense. You went from a situation where you had a whole bunch of motives that really didn't make sense to now a concrete motive. This person is killing people to steal cars to commit bank robberies.
Although authorities now understand why the suspect is murdering innocent people, they have no clue who he is. Investigators face the nearly impossible challenge of identifying and catching a ruthless gunman before he kills again. The FBI and Maryland's Montgomery County Police are hunting a killer who has already committed 4 homicides, as well as a bank robbery. Several FBI agents are part of the task force pursuing the gunman, including Special Agent Robert Coffey.
One of the main roles of the FBI, specifically in this type of a crime, is that we work with many different agencies to corral all of the investigators and bring forth the information in one kind of a think tank.
This multi-agency approach is an invaluable investigative resource for Montgomery County homicide detective Ed Day.
When you start working with multiple jurisdictions on different cases, well, the more jurisdictions are involved, the more jurisdictions have an interest, the more assets you can draw from.
The task force now understands their suspect's crime pattern. He steals a person's car at gunpoint, killing his victim, then uses the vehicle in a bank robbery. Investigators continue to look for past unsolved cases that involved a similar pattern.
nothing occurs in a vacuum. Somebody doesn't just start killing people, so that's when we really started doing the research.
They identify an incident that occurred in their county almost a year earlier.
Is this your car? No, it's not my car.
Our victim was a maintenance man, an Hispanic male.
Give me your keys.
He was accosted by a white male carrying a large caliber dark handgun.
Where's your car?
When the masked gunman asked for the victim's car keys, the man claimed he didn't own a car.
Oh,
The suspect demanded to know which car belonged to him. He was told to turn around and face away from the suspect, get down on his knees and put his hand behind his head.
where's your car? Where's your car?
Our victim at that time felt quite certain that he was going to be executed.
It's better be your car.
The suspect fired 3 shots. One of the shots hit him in the forearm.
The victim managed to flee down an alley and hide behind a bush.
And spent some minutes there waiting for the situation to calm down.
After 10 minutes, the victim returned to the street and waved down the first car he saw, hoping for assistance. To his horror, it was the gunman. An alert neighbor had called police. The victim's life was spared. The following day, a witness reported seeing a masked gunman leaving the scene of a bank robbery in Centerville, Virginia. Police later recovered the getaway vehicle and determined it was the car stolen from the maintenance man. Investigators examined the evidence gathered at the scene of the carjacking. All they have is a bullet fragment that was lodged in the victim's arm. Ballistics expert Joe Capera.
One does not necessarily need the whole bullet as long as the fragment that is left that he is examining has enough ballistic evidence on it that he can use.
He tests the fragment against the other recovered bullets to determine if that case is connected to their current investigation. The bullet fragment matches, but the task force is still no closer to identifying their suspect.
The lab's not getting anything out of these. I mean, these cars are...
With little hard evidence, investigators study the killer's behavior as exhibited through his actions, searching for clues to his identity.
This guy...
Authorities examine the newly linked case and determine he is unusually bold and cocky.
When the investigators got together and discussed the commitment level of this individual to stay at a crime scene for 10 minutes waiting for a witness to come back, raised our level of concern about the subject himself.
He's not in a big hurry. It feels pretty comfortable that the police aren't going to be there anytime soon.
Investigators also believe the suspect has a quick-tempered, vengeful personality.
He's very upset with his victim. He's decided that he has been himself wronged in some way, and he's going to make him pay for it.
But authorities cannot understand why the suspect uses what appears to be an unnecessary level of violence during the carjackings.
It does not make sense to kill somebody in the least risky part of the crime. The biggest risk he's taken is when he goes into those banks, as far as getting captured, being identified, or running into any real obstacles. Taking these people, innocent people off in the middle of the night in a ground of his own choosing where he can isolate them. I mean, he's safer at that location than he is at anywhere else and anything else he does. It just doesn't make sense why he chose to kill these people.
Their suspect is not only dangerously disturbed, but also clever.
Yeah, we'll just pull in here. See.
One of the more interesting parts of The MO that this individual used was the number of jurisdictions through which he perpetrated his crimes.
He exploits the fact that no single police department can readily see his entire crime pattern.
We have a carjacking in one jurisdiction. We have a stolen tag from a second jurisdiction. We have a bank robbery in a third jurisdiction. And then we have the car abandoned in a fourth jurisdiction.
The gunman's efforts to stymie police do not stop there. Each time he abandons a stolen car, he leaves it unlocked with the keys in plain view.
One of the difficult parts of recovering the vehicles following the robberies is that they were being driven by other people. By leaving the vehicle with the keys in it, the vehicles were then subsequently restolen. Leaving the vehicles to be restolen destroyed whatever forensic evidence would have been left behind. So the only thing we had to match all of the crimes was the forensic evidence from the ballistics.
Investigators continue to look for additional unsolved carjackings in which the vehicle was later used in a bank robbery. They identify a case that occurred within miles of the other thefts.
A woman was walking out of a doctor's office and realized that she was being followed. She turned to try to go back to the doctor's office, but was confronted by the individual and then asked for her keys. They walked over to the car.
Come on, come on, come on.
Start it. Start the car. Start
The
the
gunman
car.
forced the
Start the
frightened
car.
woman to start her car.
And upon starting the vehicle, had her get out and kneel down next to a wall.
No. On your knees. Put your hands up. There you go.
Upon kneeling down, he had her wait there for a short period of time.
She described it as 30 or 40 seconds passed.
Now, if you listen.
You have to wonder is how much of that time did he spend thinking about whether or not he was going to shoot her. She was very compliant, did everything she was told to do right when she was told to do it. That might have saved her.
The next day, her vehicle was used in a bank robbery. The investigators wonder why their suspect allowed this woman to live, yet killed the others. They come up with several theories.
The fact that she was a Caucasian female might have had something to do with it. He might have had harbored some malice towards Hispanic people or foreign people, or it could be something simple about he lost control in those situations. In fact, the best way to gain control was to kill him.
The task force has little to work with, but is determined to go on the offensive.
Now we're trying to figure out how can we get ahead of him? How can we be in a position where we can be waiting for him when he does something? Or we can be prepared to mobilize very quickly with the resources necessary to get him.
The investigators focus on the one aspect of the suspect's crime pattern that they can anticipate.
We could not predict when a carjacking would take place. They were too random. We did, however, know that following the carjacking, we would have a bank robbery.
If authorities can only predict which banks he will rob or where he will be traveling, they might have a chance to catch him. A masked gunman strikes again and again in suburban Maryland, just north of the nation's capital. He shoots his victims while stealing their cars. Which he later uses to rob banks.
Hey guys, I got some photos of the bank.
In the spring of 1992, the FBI and Montgomery County Police analyzed their suspect's habits in hopes of trapping him.
Identify why this guy's picking these banks. Go ahead and stick him up on the
Homicide Detective Ed Day.
We had people take aerial photographs of every crime scene and the different escape routes and things of that nature, trying to find some logical pattern to what he was doing, something that would maybe give us a clue. What are consistencies? What are inconsistencies? Is there anything like that that we can use to our advantage to foretell what he might do next?
On the surface, the list of crime scenes appears random. But a closer look by investigators reveals all the banks he robbed share a single trait.
Everywhere he went, he had access to a major roadway that would take him pretty quickly to a thoroughfare like 495 or 270 or something like that.
The task force shifts their focus from predicting where the suspect will strike next to catching him when he makes his escape after a bank robbery. They decide they will cast a dragnet on all highway exit ramps in the area. FBI Special Agent Robert Coffey.
We developed a plan where we would cast a net using all of the jurisdictions, law enforcement within the Washington area, to where once the bank robbery were to take place, he would have to pass through some points of the net.
Meeting with officers from every police department in the area, the task force details their plan. They will watch for any carjacking reports resembling their suspect's MO. Officers from each jurisdiction will then prepare for a quick response if a bank is subsequently robbed. They will immediately stake out pre-assigned highway exit ramps targeting the stolen car.
Once he's carjacked the vehicles, and implement the plan.
There was enough support at each particular location that he could be followed. We could bring to bear enough additional manpower to make a stop of our choosing and, of course, effect an arrest if we were lucky enough to spot him.
Ready to cast their net, investigators wait for the suspect to steal a car.
You're all key players in the plan. Let's get them.
At 5 a.m. each morning, Special Agent Coffey begins his day by reviewing the reports of all the area car thefts from the night before. He looks for the one that matches their suspect's MO.
Take a look at it.
If the suspect stole a car, the task force needs to identify it before banks open at 9.
Take a look at it.
But months pass with no sign of their suspect. Investigators begin to worry that the killer has gone underground and may never be caught.
We assume he's obviously stressed at this particular point. He's feeling the heat of the notoriety of what he's done.
October 9th, 1992.
Special Agent Coffey.
8 months after the killer's most recent slaying.
I get notification from our Baltimore agents that another carjacking has taken place. We've got a white male with a ski mask, latex gloves, and a handgun. It's taken place all the way up in Baltimore.
At approximately 7 a.m., a 15-year-old girl walked to her mother's car. Suddenly, an armed man approached her and demanded the keys.
Police officer heard this and came to her aid.
Get away from the car! Get away from the car! Get away from the car! Get away from the car!
There was an exchange of gunfire. And the carjacker took her vehicle and fled the scene.
black Honda Civic.
We were feeling very good because we had very, very fresh information, and we knew he was on the move, and he was in Baltimore and more than likely on the way back here.
The task force determines there is no need to wait for a bank robbery.
Based on that information, the task force casts the net around the Washington metro area, hoping that he's going to come back through that net.
Patrolmen and SWAT units from jurisdictions throughout Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Northern Virginia race to prearranged locations on freeway exit ramps to watch for the stolen car. Since police cannot be sure if the suspect has had time to switch the license plates, they pull over every vehicle matching its description. Each time, they know they may face a shooter who has already taken 4 lives.
Let me see your hand. See your hand. Driver, walk back. Driver, open the door slowly.
The FBI and police departments throughout the Washington, D.C. area hunt a suspected killer. They stop every vehicle matching the description of the one they believe he stole an hour earlier. Police pull over dozens of cars, but come up empty.
What's going on?
You got a girl.
As the search continues, 50 miles away in western Maryland, Brunswick police officer Gary Klein is on routine patrol.
I observed a small black and color passenger vehicle. I saw that there was no front license plate on it. And as the vehicle passed me, I looked over and observed the driver had a nylon stocking pulled down over his face. Kind of shocked me, and I was like, not really sure what's going on here, but it kind of drew my attention real quick. I turned around, caught back up to the car, radioed my dispatchers and the 911 center, requested information on the tag. And the subject in the small black car sped off and wouldn't pull over for me. Then I'm informed by our dispatchers that this subject is wanted for shooting at a Baltimore City officer.
The hundreds of officers mobilized in the D.C. area are too far away to assist. Officer Klein is alone against a ruthless killer.
The adrenaline's pumping now because I'm pursuing this vehicle, knowing somewhere in there I'm going to have to confront this individual. The speeds that we maintained in some places were 90 mile per hour to a little over 100 mile per hour.
Officer Klein chases the suspect from Maryland into Virginia.
He was very intent on getting away from me.
Dispatcher, we're getting ready to go right on Interstate 71.
He just went straight down the middle of the bridge, just forcing people east and westbound out of his way. I had to back off because I didn't want to endanger myself or the innocent people or citizens out on the street, where he was actually able to gain a good bit of distance on me. But once the roadway cleared up a little bit where I could safely get through the vehicles, I was able to catch back up to him.
Klein pursues the suspect into West Virginia.
Made a right off Route 340, and he went down this small asphalt road, and when he hit that, he was going too fast with the rain and everything and lost control and struck the curb. Stepped out of the vehicle with my weapon drawn, and I seen him kind of lean over in the car towards the passenger seat, and I seen the gun come up inside the car.
Officer Klein is concerned about firing his gun in a public place.
When you discharge your weapon, you just don't want a round just going out there somewhere, and you could strike somebody innocent. You have a split second to make this decision, and whatever decision you make can affect you for the rest of your life. At that point, he placed the car in reverse and sped backwards quickly towards my cruiser in what I believe was an attempt to ram my car or strike me. He proceeded down a small access road. And I proceeded after him. He sped into this little dead-end dirt gravel area, and he tried to go behind this bulldozer and wrecked into it. There's nowhere for him to go, and now I have to confront him. At that time, I see the gun coming up, which just kind of made my heart jump out of my chest.
While the suspect ducks for cover, Officer Klein strategically moves to his right.
You don't want to stay in one position, especially after he already knows where you're at.
Klein's tactic works. The suspect fires at the position where Klein used to be.
I actually fired more shots at him as he ran to get to the backside of his car for cover.
With backup units still minutes away, the lone officer fights to stay alive in a violent face-off with a vicious killer.
Let me see him.
The suspected killer is in a desperate shootout in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, with lone police officer Gary Klein.
I see him start to come up from behind his car through the passenger side window with the gun raised, and he's coming up. I remember firing at him and striking the car, and he ducked down behind the car again. Several seconds passed. He raises back up. You can hear it, the actual sound of the bullet striking the car, the metal, and he ducks back down behind the car again.
Finally, backup arrives.
When they put their hand on my shoulder and I knew who they were, it was this big relief. Burden was lifted off my shoulders because now I knew I had fellow officers there. Within the next 10 minutes, police officers from several jurisdictions were on the scene.
Come out from behind the car.
The gunman realizes he is outnumbered.
Then the suspect stood up and walked out in front of myself and my cruiser, probably about 15 yards, and put the gun to his head. And I continued to yell at him to drop the gun, to throw the gun on the ground, at which time he told me he wouldn't do that.
Listen, hold on a minute. Hold on a minute.
West Virginia State Police Corporal John Jeffries begins negotiating with the gunman.
We can work through this. Let me help you. The only thing we've done so far.
After several minutes of negotiation, the suspect then pulled the nylon stocking up on the top of his head. Still wasn't able to really get a good, clear look at him.
The suspect begins to talk. He says he's an unemployed house painter.
He said that he was just upset. He had had some relation problems with his girlfriend, that he had done some things he wasn't real happy about, and just all these things had piled up and just troubled him, and he didn't know why he was doing the things he was doing.
After a 45-minute standoff, the gunman makes an unusual demand.
I remember him saying he wanted to talk to his mother. So he gave his mother's name and phone number.
Several tense minutes pass as police attempt to reach the suspect's mother.
He advised the suspect that they had his mother on the phone.
The woman on the line asks the negotiator for the suspect's name.
He identified himself as Alan Newman. He wasn't real sure of the police. He didn't know if we were just lying to him or what we were doing. He said, well, ask my mom what my favorite cookie is. I remember Corporal Jeffries saying, your mom said your favorite cookie is chocolate chip. And he started crying. It really shocked me because I thought he was just going to drop the gun and give up. You see the hammer coming back and everything's like slow motion. You see the hammer drop, you're waiting for the gun to go off. And it didn't.
Seizing the opportunity, officers rush in and subdue the gunman, ending the standoff.
After it was all over and done, very relieved, very appreciative of all of the guys that were there that day. I was able to help to get this person off the street and put him where he needed to be so that nobody else would be hurt.
Police take Alan Newman into custody and confiscate his Ruger 357 as evidence. It is the same model used in the murders, according to FBI Special Agent Robert Coffey.
From the prior ballistics, we knew what type of gun it would be. It would have been a specific Ruger make, and in fact, that's what he was carrying. The same types of bullets that were used in the shootings and the homicides were, in fact, still in the weapon.
You have told us that over and over.
After nearly a year of hard work, investigators finally meet the killer face to face.
We no longer have someone running throughout the counties killing people for cars. We were very excited about getting the chance to talk to the individual to find out why.
Go ahead, take it.
While Newman admits to the Baltimore carjacking, he refuses to admit to any of the murders, according to homicide detective Ed Day.
You don't have anything. Throughout the interview process, he remained pretty cocky and he thought he was pretty cool.
Investigators continue to press Newman. While at a firearms laboratory, a ballistics expert fires Newman's gun into an 800-gallon tank of water. The examiner compares the unique markings on the fired bullet to those on the bullets recovered from the 4 murders and the attempted homicide. Ballistics expert Joe Capera.
It is a scientific certainty that this is the firearm that fired these bullets, and no other firearm could possibly do that.
You want to hear it again?
After hours of interrogation, investigators receive the ballistics report.
That's like the magic piece of evidence, and that's the one that you really knew would seal the whole case. We had physical, undeniable evidence that we could put in front of a jury that he could not refute in any way, shape, or form. We could convict him without much trouble, and we could have gotten the death sentence with the information that we had, which put it over the top, and he decided it was best to make a deal for life rather than take the chance on being executed.
Alan Newman pleads guilty to all the charges against him and is sentenced to 5 life terms without parole, plus 100 years for handgun violations.
Looking back, it was the collective efforts of more than a dozen police agencies contributing interviews and evidence that led to the successful conclusion of this case.
The accomplishment for all police officers and all investigators is to arrest the bad guy and put him in jail. And when you do that, you get a nice warm feeling for about 10 minutes until the next case comes in and you have to start all over again.
But for now, every investigator who worked this case is content to know they have ended one man's violent rampage. In 1996, Spokane, Washington is gripped by a series of violent robberies and bombings. The FBI links the crimes to a radical group determined to overthrow the government. Facing deadly traps and a nearly invisible foe, investigators vow to stop the shadowy extremists, ready to unleash more domestic terror.
Constitution of the United States allows for the lawful expression of any belief. But when a paramilitary faction used bombs and robbery to further their cause, they crossed the line. The well-organized terror cell was difficult to define and even harder to stop. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. As the group stockpiled weapons for an assault, the FBI and local police were determined to bring them to justice.
Spokane, Washington, a city of 200,000 near the state's eastern border with Idaho. On Monday, April 1st, 1996, 24 people were working inside a satellite office of the city's Spokesman Review newspaper. At 2:30 p.m., a van pulled up behind the building. It was there, less than 15 seconds. Inside, a reporter had finished his work and was looking forward to spending the afternoon with his son. They did not realize what was waiting for them outside. Despite significant damage to the building, nobody was injured. Units from the Spokane County Sheriff's Department responded to the 911 calls. The reporter and his son had not seen anything suspicious. But one employee said that seconds before the blast, she saw a masked man jump into a white van that sped away from behind the building. She didn't get a license plate number. While much of local law enforcement was at the newspaper office, a white van pulled up outside Spokane's U.S. Bank several miles away. It had been 15 minutes since the newspaper bombing. 2 armed, masked men burst into the bank and announced they were robbing it.
Okay, people, this is a robbery! Move!
As they passed her, one teller tripped the silent alarm.
Stay where you're at! Move it! Stand down.
The robbers threatened to detonate a pipe bomb if anyone disobeyed their orders.
Take the cash out and fill the bag up.
They warned the teller not to give them dye packs, paint canisters designed to explode and stain stolen money, and bank robbers. Once the gunmen had their money,
You, over there, and you.
they herded everyone into a corner.
Move it now! Okay, folks!
They trained their guns on the hostages, allowing valuable seconds to tick by as the fuse burned. At the newspaper office crime scene, investigators heard radio reports about the bank robbery and explosion. That scene was secure, so several detectives headed to the new crime scene. And the sheriff's office dispatched more deputies to the bank. At the time, Special Agent Mark Cullinan of the FBI's Spokane Resident Agency was on his way to the newspaper bombing with his partner.
While en route, we received a call that a bank robbery had occurred. Another bomb had been set off inside the bank. Since my primary investigative jurisdiction was bank robberies, I immediately diverted to the bank.
The employees and customers were shaken, but safe. They believed everyone had gotten out before the blast.
That roof's gonna go.
But investigators had not yet declared the crime scene secure. Explosives Disposal Unit Supervisor Sergeant James Goodwin had to make sure it was safe for police to check the building.
We were concerned about the possibility of a second device because any time you have an explosive device related incident, if you have one, there is always at least a potential that you have another.
Bombers sometimes leave a second device behind as a booby trap, specifically to target law enforcement. The Explosives Disposal Unit swept the bank, determining it was clear of additional bombs or victims, and radioed to those outside that it was safe to process the scene.
Okay, it's all clear.
You gonna get on the phone and see what we can get?
The assailants were fast and organized, getting in and out in seconds and making off with $50,000. They weren't typical bank robbers.
Bank robberies are usually conducted by lone individuals who are seeking money to support a drug habit or something along those lines. To have somebody in an organized manner come in and take over a bank with this much violence and prior planning is an unusual occurrence.
Agents questioned one witness who was in the bank's parking lot when the robbery took place. She said after the explosion, she saw two masked men run from the bank and get into a white van. A third man was driving. He had gray hair and a beard.
It was a white van.
White van. They both had masks on.
She had written down the van's license plate number.
And they drove off. I looked back over after writing this down, and I saw the guy put on the black mask.
Yeah, we need to be on the lookout for all.
They learned it had been stolen from Ellensburg, Washington.
Charlie 504, I'll be checking the parking
Spokane Emergency Dispatch issued an APB for the van, and officers began a block-by-block grid search of nearby streets. At the newspaper office, FBI agents arrived and questioned the witnesses.
Did you ever see that second guy take the mask off?
The woman who saw the van there also mentioned that the driver was an older man with gray hair and a beard. But the most distinct clues linking the two crime scenes were leaflets containing religious propaganda, a common sight in the area.
At the scene of the Spokesman Review bombing and also at the bank, we did discover numerous leaflets which had obviously been left there by the robbers. Religious propaganda is pretty prevalent throughout the area. A lot of times these groups will leaflet a neighborhood or an area, leaving them under windshield wipers and on front doorsteps, just spouting their ideals and trying to get their message out.
But this group delivered their message with bombs and bank robbery.
Charlie 504, I've located
Sheriff's deputies continued their search for the getaway van.
plate 2233 Union.
90 minutes after the bank robbery, one deputy spotted it in a parking lot a mile from the bank. From the back, he couldn't tell if the robbers were there. No one was inside. Dispatch advised the deputy that the van could be rigged with a bomb. The explosives disposal unit arrived in minutes. They knew the suspects might have booby-trapped the vehicle. If there was a bomb in the van, its trigger device could be radio controlled. Since police radios can set off such triggers, investigators ordered all radios turned off. Because they had enough open space to do so, they used a robot with a camera to check the van first.
We initially sent the robot downrange in an attempt to look into the van. We found that we were limited in what we could see, and we sent a technician downrange near the van in a bomb suit.
The others waited in the mobile command center for the technician's report. Even in the most dangerous situations, bomb technicians need to keep their hands uncovered in case they have to perform delicate tasks. It is an unavoidable risk of the job.
He smelled gasoline, saw what he thought to be gasoline coming from underneath one of the doors to the van, and saw what appeared to him to be a time delay device that appeared to be intended to ignite the gasoline.
Since the trigger was a time delay, not radio controlled, it was safe to resume using radios. Attached to the wick, the technician saw a small initiator, an element that sets the wick burning.
And cousin incendiary in that route.
And what would you like to do with it?
Well, look at this. I can probably ready safe it.
Mark, before you go ahead and separate the two, would you let us know that you're going to do it?
In an effort to preserve any evidence the van might contain, the bomb squad technician was putting his own safety in jeopardy.
Okay, go ahead and make the cut. All right, good, get it out of there.
It worked.
Okay, he's got it out of there.
In the van, investigators found another copy of the manifesto the robbers left behind at the bank in newspaper bombings.
Right down here, hands here.
To FBI Special Agent David Bedford, the rhetoric in the letter was typical of white supremacist militia groups in the area.
That was more or less a long religious sermon about usury, a biblical term referring to the charging of interest. And the thing that stood out most about this letter that was left behind was a symbol on the page.
Compare it with this one right here.
Agents knew they could get help analyzing the manifesto from a Spokesman Review reporter. Bill Moreland is an expert on extremist groups in the area.
For the past 22 years, I've covered hate groups here in our area in the Northwest. Chief among them, the Aryan Nations, which is 35 miles from Spokane in North Idaho. It's attracted a lot of different extremists from different movements, anti-tax movement, anti-abortion movements, the Ku Klux Klan, Posse Comitatus.
The FBI showed Moreland the robbers' manifesto.
It was clearly white separatist dogma, but what intrigued me most was what was on the bottom of that note. It was the Christian cross superimposed with a capital P, and it's what I knew to be the logo of the Phineas priesthood.
Individuals who call themselves Phineas priests say the crimes they commit are in accordance with their interpretation of God's law, sometimes robbing banks to finance a plot to overthrow the federal government. Moreland told agents about an interview he had done months earlier. As part of a story, he'd arranged to meet several members of an extremist group at a clandestine location. They did not identify themselves as Phineas priests, but they professed some similar beliefs.
When we got there, we saw 7 or 8 individuals who were heavily armed, automatic weapons, street sweeper type shotguns, sidearms, all dressed in army camouflage type material. They went through a number of exercises for our benefit.
The men explained they worked in cells with no formal leader, no strict organization. This leaderless resistance was designed to make it difficult for law enforcement to track them. They said they were preparing for an armed confrontation with the federal government.
I said, well, what happens if you're driving home from this event, from this training exercise, with all your guns and your military equipment? If a police officer were to stop you on a traffic offense, what would you do? And the individual I was talking to said, didn't hesitate for a minute. He said, I would kill him. I'd kill the police officer. When we're equipped like this, he said, we're running hot, and we would shoot to kill any police officer that stopped us to protect the identity of our group.
Agents believed the bank robbers they were after were every bit as dangerous and elusive. After masked men robbed a bank in Spokane, Washington, and detonated bombs at the bank and a newspaper office, authorities suspected well-armed extremists who called themselves Phineas Priests. Spokesman Review newspaper reporter Bill Moreland is an expert on extremist groups in the Pacific Northwest. The FBI asked him for details about self-professed Phineas Priests, known to commit violent crime in the name of religion.
They're secret groups, and they come together with 5 or 6 or 7 of their fellow people that are fellow believers and decide to carry out some sort of action. They don't tell the world about it, and you can't look them up in the phone book or on the internet. They're very secretive. They believe that God is one of their members and that they're following his directions to carry out these crimes that they commit.
Special Agent David Bedford was part of the team investigating extremist groups in the area.
Hey, here's one more thing. I wonder if you get a chance later on.
They found nothing related to the recent bombings.
We had very few leads to go by after the robbery. The individuals were masked, they wore camouflage clothing, they wore gloves. Very few leads to work with, other than a composite drawing of the getaway driver.
The FBI hoped to have more than a vague drawing before going to the public to reduce false leads that take up time and resources. But they could not wait any longer.
So what we did was publish that and sent copies all around Washington, Oregon, Idaho, with the idea, with the hopes of someone identifying this person.
Information that was called in was filtered through the FBI's Rapid Start program, a database system designed to collect and organize large numbers of leads so they can be prioritized.
Actually, I do see it's just south of... We received hundreds and hundreds of tips or possible leads of who this individual was. And so a team of agents would go out and investigate all of these people who came in that were lookalikes.
One by one, they eliminated suspects.
James Johnson, no longer suspect.
Despite spending hundreds of man-hours following every viable lead, investigators came up with nothing. The case stalled until the assailants struck again. On July 12th, 3 months after the first attacks, a woman spotted a masked man placing a bomb in front of a Spokane health clinic. She called in the getaway van's license plate number. Spokane's 911 call center dispatched fire and police personnel to the scene.
Baker 504, I'll be checking the area.
Like a dozen others, Deputy Dan Spivey of the Spokane Sheriff's Office started off toward the clinic. What the deputies didn't know was that the U.S. bank that was robbed in April was being hit again. This time there were 3 masked gunmen instead of 2. Like the earlier robbery, the assailants had a bomb. One teller recognized the voice of one of the robbers and set off the silent alarm as she loaded up.
Hurry up, let's go! Now!
The men moved efficiently, spoke in code, and seemed to be timing the robbery. They didn't notice the drive-through teller who worked in a separate part of the bank.
Zip it up, please!
While those inside the bank were staring down the barrels of guns, everything appeared normal to customers on the outside. Hoping the robbers had not heard the customer over her loudspeaker,
Hello?
the drive-through teller tried to get him to help. She didn't know if the customer understood her gestures, if he would help or run. Deputy Spivey was almost to the clinic when he got a more urgent call.
Baker, 504, I heard a bank robbery in progress come out at the same U.S. bank that had been robbed on April 1st.
But before deputies arrived, one of the assailants announced they were at Code Blue, and they left, taking $37,000 in cash and the bomb with them. The drive-through customers saw the men get in their van. He decided to tail them and called 911 as he drove. The plate he reported did not match the one from the health clinic, but criminals often put two different plates on stolen vehicles to confuse investigators.
I call dispatch.
Spokane Emergency Dispatch advised the man not to put himself in danger. He said he would follow at a safe distance until deputies caught up. Police hoped the customer would not be spotted by the armed assailants. In July 1996, authorities believed members of an extremist militia group robbed the U.S. Bank in Spokane, Washington for the second time in 3 months. A customer saw the robbers leave in a van and followed. Deputy Dan Spivey was en route to the bank when he heard about the pursuit.
Our dispatch advised us that a citizen with a cell phone was following that suspect vehicle, and they in turn were relaying location information to us field deputies.
Spivey changed directions to try to catch up. The customer gave constant updates on his location, but had a hard time keeping up with the suspect's van while not being spotted.
Behind a mall area, the citizen lost the vehicle. And I quickly searched the area, attempting to locate such a vehicle. Was unsuccessful. Decided to go back through the area in a more slow, methodical manner.
After an hour of searching, Spivey drove into a parking lot above the downtown area.
I checked an upper parking lot, and at the far end of the parking lot saw what I believed to be the suspect vehicle. Excuse me, ma'am. Would you leave the area right now, please? Get on the other side of the lot. Sir, could you get away from that vehicle and go down towards the other end of the lot? Thank you. Baker 504 rear plate, 2233 Victor.
One plate matched the one from the bank robbery. And the other from the health clinic bombing. No one appeared to be inside.
I'll be backing off and standing by.
Explosives Disposal Unit Supervisor Sergeant James Goodwin, who helped defuse a bomb in a van after the April bank robbery, declared the vehicle an explosive hazard.
Given the history, we had a concern that this vehicle may contain a device as well. The natural thing to expect, given this was kind of the second go-around, was that having been unsuccessful the first time, they would try harder the second time.
deputies smelled a strong gasoline odor. But again, it was difficult to see what kind of device might be inside. Rather than risk sending in a squad member, explosives disposal technicians once again deployed their specialized robot. The technicians operated the robot remotely from the safety of inside the EDU truck.
We sent the robot down range in an effort to scout the vehicle and see what we could see.
The robot was equipped with a video camera, remote-controlled eyes for the explosives disposal unit. Technicians guided the robot to peer inside the van looking for a bomb.
The windows of this particular van had been darkened, so we weren't able to see much of anything at all.
They tried the robot's lights.
Oh, too much window tint on it. I can't see anything out of the back either.
There seemed to be something in the van, but the robot's camera still couldn't see clearly through the window tinting.
Can't see anything out of that window, can you?
They needed to know what the object was.
We elected to use the robot to shoot a window out of the van and open it so that we could see inside.
The technicians then activated the robot's water cannon disruptor, which fires a slug by water pressure rather than gunpowder, so sparks are less likely.
Take the shot. All right.
Nice job, boy. They did it.
Why don't we see if we can get some of that glass raked out of the window so we've got a good view of the inside.
They used the robot's powerful claw to clear the glass.
Once the window was broken, we were able to see inside the van and observe what appeared to be an incendiary device. It looks like a couple propane cylinders, timer, and I'm not sure what that is. Yeah, taped into the timer.
It looks like an initiator. Right down here? Yeah. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into the window.
It appeared that it was intended to initiate a fire in the van, burn the van, thereby leaving us very little evidence.
The explosives disposal technician guided the robot to clear the bomb from the van. He then moved the bomb to a more remote area so they could render it safe.
There it is.
They again used the water cannon disruptor.
Take your shot when you're ready. Ready? All right.
Just open it right up.
In the protective suit, a technician checked the bomb and confirmed it had been rendered safe.
Yeah, looks like he's all clear down there.
Once again, the suspects had used a stolen van.
Good. All right, good.
But this time, investigators found no manifestos or other evidence inside. Although there were 3 assailants in the latest robbery, the FBI believed the same individuals robbed the bank 3 months earlier. For help, they turned to forensic examiner Richard Vorderbrugge of the FBI's Audio, Video, and Image Analysis Unit. Similar clothing and weapons suggested 2 of the gunmen took part in both robberies. Vorderbrugge analyzed surveillance video to determine their heights.
I used a technique called perspective analysis photogrammetry. That involves taking a set of measurements of fixed objects within the scene, determining the specific perspective of the scene, that is to say, how the camera itself was related to fixed objects within the scene.
Because the cameras were facing downward, Vorderbrugge had to use complex mathematics to determine how actual size is reflected at that angle. He then compared the measurements of the fixed objects, such as a table leg, to the relative height of the bank robbers. He concluded the 2 robbers from the April 1st robbery were very likely 2 of the 3 from the July robbery.
One of them was approximately 5 feet 7.5 inches, and the second robber was approximately 6 feet 1 inch. And by finding, as I did, that the heights of the 2 individuals in the bank in each case were about the same, it certainly helped strengthen the case that they were the same people involved.
With the robberies and bombings likely committed by individuals calling themselves Phineas priests, the FBI elevated the status of the suspects.
We decided that they were not here for the sole purpose of robbing a bank and taking the money. These guys had a message that they were trying to get out to the public, and it was causing havoc in the city of Spokane. A lot of people were concerned about their safety, and as a result, the FBI felt like, you know what, these are terrorists.
To help capture the domestic terror suspects, the U.S. Bank offered a $100,000 reward. Despite the reward, a month passed with no new leads. Agents believed the terrorists were out there training, getting ready to strike again. After authorities linked several robberies and bombings in Spokane to a suspected group of domestic terrorists, the targeted bank offered a $100,000 reward, and the FBI released a composite sketch of the getaway driver. A month after the second bank robbery in August 1996, the reward offer generated a promising lead. An informant came forward saying he thought he knew the man in the composite sketch. The informant, a licensed firearms dealer, believed he met the man and a few others several months earlier. It was before the bank robberies began. He sold a group of men military clothing and equipment.
The merchandise that you guys ordered.
One of the men looked like the driver in the sketch. The informant said they asked about buying plastic explosives and a bazooka. Then they asked for his help outfitting their SUVs with tank armor and bipod-mounted machine guns. But he wanted nothing to do with such illegal activities.
I don't know if I can help you guys on that.
Before he left, one of them bragged that a small group of well-prepared men was going to bring the banking establishment to its knees.
Could you show me?
The informant said he met the men at an auto repair shop owned by one of them. The shop was located in the small town of Sandpoint, Idaho, about 75 miles northeast of Spokane. In late August, the FBI went to Sandpoint to investigate the lead. Agents rented an abandoned building with a view of the auto repair shop and discreetly watched the suspects as they outfitted their SUVs. FBI Special Agent Mark Cullinan believed they might have found the robbers.
When observing these subjects' daily activities, it was suspicious to us, first of all, that they didn't have any noticeable means of employment. That was an indicator to us that they're gaining money or the means to operate through other methods. Since we didn't know what had happened to the money from the bank robberies, this was a possibility.
Agents photographed the suspects and anyone seen on the premises.
One of the individuals we identified as Robert Berry. Berry ran an automotive repair shop in the Sandpoint area, but didn't seem to be doing any business, didn't seem to be using it to generate any income.
Agents identified a second suspect as Charles Barbie. Although Barbie had no record of convictions, he had been arrested for trying to buy supplies from military personnel. Barbie and Berry matched the heights of the bank robbers given by forensics experts. The FBI determined the third man was Vern Merrill. Merrill appeared to be the leader of the group. and he resembled witness descriptions of the getaway drivers seen at the bombings and bank robberies. Agents needed more information on the men. They took a risk to get it.
Go ahead and kill the light. Kill the light.
One night in early September, after the suspects left the shop, surveillance teams installed a hidden video camera on a telephone pole behind the garage. Agents didn't know if the area was booby-trapped or if they themselves were being watched. The teams got out safely.
Looks like they're shooting an assault rifle.
What the camera revealed was chilling. Agents watched the men test different weapons and types of bullets to see which could pierce the steel of car doors and the Kevlar of bulletproof vests. It was clear they were preparing for battle. During weeks of surveillance, the FBI tailed the suspects from the ground and the air as they drove to various cities in the Pacific Northwest. Agents believe the men were casing banks.
Suspects are heading west on Sprague Avenue.
On September 6, 1996, 2 months after the second robbery, the bank, newspaper office, and health clinic previously targeted received threatening letters promising further violent attacks.
Some sort of stationary surveillance plan.
Authorities developed contingency plans that would allow them to follow the robbers to their next target,
So far, they've hit us twice. They can't choose
wherever
where
it might be.
head over. But that's not to say they couldn't take any of the other back roads down to meet or intersect I-90. So what we're going to have to do is come up with points far enough away that they can't take a back road and get around behind us before getting in their home territory up there.
A month later, on October 8th, investigators on the stakeout observed what they believed were final preparations for another bank robbery.
Okay, listen up, units. They're all leaving now. 3 white male occupants.
They contacted Special Agent David Bedford.
69213. They're leaving now.
I received a phone call from the agent that was actually watching them load up. I started calling a lot of other coworkers saying, get in your car, start heading towards Sandpoint because something's going on and we need everybody up there as soon as possible. And so we began our surveillance, not knowing where they were going to end up.
The FBI tailed the suspects as they headed west out of Sandpoint. Their license plates indicated the truck was to be used in a crime.
The plates on the Suburban did not match front to rear, and both had been reported stolen. This also added a new sense of urgency to our investigation.
They followed the men 400 miles west, across the Oregon border.
The individual looks like he's breaking into a van.
In Hood River, Oregon, agents watched the men steal a van from a used car lot and add it to their convoy. If the FBI was correct, the suspects planned to use the stolen van in a bank robbery and abandon it afterwards.
We observed the vehicles stop at a truck stop where they shifted some gear between vehicles, they did some moving around and some planning, and then they departed again in one vehicle.
As agents shadowed the van, they realized where the suspects were headed.
By approximately 6 o'clock in the morning, we were hundreds of miles away from where we had started and on the outskirts of Portland. We watched them drive a meandering route into the city.
By 10 o'clock, it was clear which Portland bank the suspects intended to hit.
They're making a left into a parking lot. Appears to be a bank.
And as we watched them pull into one of the bank parking lots, we notified the bank. They immediately locked the doors to the bank, keeping all of their customers and everybody inside. And our plan was, as they exited the vans to go up and enter the bank to rob it, we were going to arrest them.
What do you think?
Agents waited for the suspects to make their move.
I like it. All right, they're in front of the bank.
I was approximately 30 yards away from them, and with my binoculars I could see exactly what they were doing inside the van, and that was pulling out their guns. They were donning masks, they were putting on their camouflage gear, and they were getting ready to make a break towards the bank. And it was at that time they saw the same things that we saw. The customers that were trying to get into the bank were unsuccessful because the bank had been locked.
It looked like the suspects were standing down. The field agents called in for instructions.
Let's keep surveillance on the vehicle.
Our agents were conferring with the United States Attorney's Office, with the heads of our divisions, and making a determination as to whether we had enough evidence at this point to arrest these subjects.
While the team conferred, surveillance units followed the stolen van as the suspects retrieved their Suburban.
They started driving back towards Washington, and we continued to follow them.
Try to take them down to the next safe location.
Soon they got the go-ahead for the arrest. Now they needed to find the safest opportunity to do so.
On the next stop, all units converge.
When the subjects stopped for gas at Union Gap, Washington, we decided that that was the best place that we had in order to effect an arrest.
But with such violent and heavily armed suspects, there was no guarantee of a safe arrest scenario. After months of investigating domestic terror suspects, surveillance units tailed them to a Union Gap, Washington gas station. Two of the suspects stayed in one of their vehicles, while the third entered the gas station. With the suspects split up, the lead agent put the operation in motion.
Temple, put your back to it.
They needed to synchronize the arrests, so all three suspects were surprised.
FBI, you're under arrest.
FBI, freeze the wheel. Hit the car. Hit the car. Hands on the wheel. Hit the car, bro. Put your hands on the car. The bed of the vehicle. Put your hands on the car.
Vern Merrill, Robert Berry, and Charles Barbie were arrested without a fight. Special Agent David Bedford discovered things could have gone much differently.
Following the arrest, we did a search of the vehicles they were driving. We found hand grenades, thousands of rounds of ammunition, probably half a dozen different types of weapons, gas masks, tear gas canisters. These guys were definitely ready for battle.
Agents also found a threatening letter to the Spokane bank that had been robbed twice. Despite the three arrests, the FBI knew one suspect was still at large.
One of the things that was a question in our minds was on the July 12th robbery, there was 3 people that came inside and a getaway driver. We were still unsure who the 4th robber was.
Agents interviewed friends and associates of the arrested suspects. They learned the 4th man was most likely Brian Radigan.
One of the things that concerned the FBI was Brian Radigan's military experience. He apparently had some training in sniper school, and so the surveillance, the investigation that we did regarding Brian was very careful, very thought out.
Those who knew Radigan said he was heavily armed, well-trained, and paranoid.
Just throw that in there, and if you don't mind.
The FBI wanted to avoid a violent confrontation, as did the suspect's family.
We solicited help from Brian Radigan's family members who, after talking to them for some time, felt that it would be in his best interest if he came forward and was arrested. And so the family members sent a train ticket to Brian and his wife.
The ticket was for a phony departure at a time when the FBI knew no other passengers would be at a Washington state train station. Undercover agents posed as station employees. When Radigan seemed at ease, they made their move. Radigan had no way to fight back or run. He and the others would be tried for their crimes, not their political or religious views.
The FBI does not investigate individuals or groups based on their beliefs. We investigate crimes. We investigated these acts because they were violent crimes. They were bombings, they were bank robberies. We investigated them as we would any other violent crime.
On July 24th, 1997, Charles Barbie, Robert Berry, and Vern Merrill were found guilty on 8 counts related to the bombings and armed robberies, and were each sentenced to life in prison. In a separate trial, Brian Radigan was found guilty of similar charges and sentenced to 55 years. Although that one Phineas priesthood cell is behind bars, the FBI and experts like Spokesman Review reporter Bill Moreland know other domestic terrorist groups are still out there.
Since 1996, the number of militia cells has dropped off, but I believe there still are a number of them out there, and they're as hardcore and deeper underground than ever, and every bit as dangerous.
If these groups do commit crimes, the FBI will not stop until they are dismantled.